My name is Hal Hartley. Actually, it's Harold Hartley, but my family calls me Hal when they're feeling good about me, and so I've taken on Hal as a name. I was born in 1924 in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'm a Nebraskan. Have been all my life practically. Uh, was raised in uh, Grand Island, which became my home in Grand Island in Nebraska, and I went all through my schooling there. Uh, Started college there. I went to university for a while. I had two brothers. Well, actually, I had uh, two stillborn brothers, older than I. I never knew them. Then I had two younger brothers that was raised with, and whom I've outlived. Well, I was pretty active in Methodist youth fellowship programs there. Uh, I don't know that I don't know that I was particularly religious, but there were girls there, so I would go there for comradeship, I guess you might call it. Particularly my grandparents, they were they had been Quakers, and they were very strict in their religion and so forth. Most of which was passed on to my parents. My father at least studied for the ministry for a time, and then kind of went really bad, got into the newspaper business, bought a little newspaper in Nebraska, and that's what got me started in the newspaper business because I spent most of my life in some form or another with newspapers. My father did, it wasn't newspaper business, and then I rather followed him. Even when I was in high school, I'd take jobs around the newspaper, doing proofreading and making proofs and do all kinds of chores in the newspaper business. But uh, never got into the business actually until after I went to college. And then when I came out of college, I went to work as a cub reporter in a newspaper. And I spent 20 years with that newspaper. I ended up as the managing editor of the paper, but I had a long and uh, fruitful career there. Oh, we very seldom could go on vacations. We did manage to make a few vacations into the Black Hills, but in those days you didn't travel far, and so our vacations were mainly spent very locally. No, I graduated from high school in May of 1941, and Pearl Harbor came along in December of 41, 6 months later. I didn't know uh, when Pearl Harbor happened. I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. I thought it was maybe in Alaska or some. I didn't know it was just some far off place that I didn't know anything about. But I became pretty well acquainted with it as time went on. Well, everybody was very mad about, or very angry at the Japanese for doing it, uh, and frightened. I think there was a fright because in those early days of the war, everything was going against us. The Japanese were wiping out everything we had, and we could very well have lost everything. It was a frightening time. It didn't last long. But within 6 to 8 months, United States became strong enough that they were able to respond to, and begin to fight back. I didn't enlist, of course. I tried to enlist several times. I have a 220 vision in my left eye, and I couldn't pass the physical to go into anything. And finally, I tumbled to the fact that they were uh, on the inspection, they would always have you read the first line, read it backwards, and so I memorized it anyway and could that pass the test. And then they called me up, as they were doing everybody in those days. This was this was almost a year after Pearl Harbor when I first got called up because I couldn't get in ahead of that. But when I finally did pass the physical, they said I could go wherever I wanted to. I'd been trying to enlist in the Marines, and thank God I didn't get in there. Instead, they for some reason or other chose the Navy, and I was happy about that. And I spent my naval career in the Navy, my war career in the Navy. Well, I was a radioman. They sent me to radio school at the University of Idaho, and it was, I graduated from that. And after I was out of there, then I was assigned to teams, signal teams. It would be 3 radiomen and 4 signalmen, and we'd be assigned to different ships and we sent overseas. And I took part in 5 invasions during the war. In order, it was Saipan and Peleliu and Leyte and Luzon and Iwo Jima. I was never in any real danger. I was always on a ship just off the coast of where it was happening, so I was able to watch it happen, but not really taking part in it. I was not in any great danger, although there was some danger, but it was not great danger, not like the guys that were on the beach. However, I did have a couple of interesting experiences. In Iwo Jima, for instance, Iwo Jima does not have a harbor, it's just open sea. And we were trying to unload our ship into other landing vessels, and it would bang them up. So they made us move inland, and we ran aground ashore at Iwo Jima. We were just very close to the shore. I could see the Marines on one side and the Japs on the other fighting each other, and they never fired a shot at me, and I thank God for that. But at any rate, that was interesting. There were several interesting times that I had. Not one of great danger, however. I can't claim that. Just before the war ended, I was assigned to a sub-chaser, and was supposed to be getting ready for the invasion of Japan itself. However, I had got an infection in my hand, and I had to go to the hospital. And they sent me to Base 18 Hospital in Guam, and I was there on Base 18 Hospital when the war ended, when they dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and so I tried to get back to my ship, and I couldn't get back. It's just a little bitty ship, and it was running ahead of me all the way. I spent 6 months, more than 6 months. This was in August that I started getting there, and it was in late November before I finally got and I never did get back to my ship. I finally had enough time and points that I was eligible for discharge, so they shipped me to Pearl Harbor, and then I was going from there to the States to be discharged. As we came out of Pearl Harbor on my ship, on the transport, my little ship that I've been chasing all over the Pacific came in right beside me and went on down, and I was able to get on this blinker light and make arrangements for them to ship me a sea bag and other things. But at any rate, it was interesting that way. After the bombing, it was pure joy. Everybody was happy about that and ready to call it a day and ready to go home. It was thousands and thousands and thousands of GIs, Navy and otherwise, that needed to get home, and they just had to just unload everything they could to get them all those ships unloaded. For instance, one of the things I did was caught a ship from when I was chasing my ship from. I caught a ship from Luzon in the Philippines to Japan. Well, on that trip there, for instance, we spent the entire trip doing nothing but throwing shells and all kinds of equipment over the side, just making room in the boat so that when we got to Japan, they could load up on more GIs and take us all home and get us discharged.
Wow.
It was a strange time. I don't think it ever happened before like that. First time I ever laid eyes on her was I was still in high school, and she was too. She was on one swimming team, and I was on another. And that particular day, she won the women's diving, and I never met her that day. However, about 6 months later, no, not 6 months, about a year later, I was on leave from my Navy boot leave, and I met her and at the dance. I spent 15 days courting her there while I had leave, and to make a short story short, within 6 months we were married.
Wow.
And we were married for 72 years. She died 2.5 years ago, and been a long time and good life. Yeah, and I was able to set it up to where I was on the GI Bill so they could finish my education. Plus, they also gave me a stipend to live on and help live. I went to work at the newspaper as just a base reporter. Really didn't know what I was doing, but I learned, and that was our life there. We set up home, and we had 2 daughters, one of whom died at just 7 or 8 months, 8 months old, I believe she was. And then our other daughter is still with me, and thank God she's able to take me wherever I want to go nowadays. I don't drive a car anymore, so she's my wheels. Nebraska, we lived there in Grand Island, Nebraska for 20 years, and then I left the newspaper business and got into public relations, which was all media relations, really. Because I was pretty knowledgeable and had a feel for the newspaper business, I was able to do a lot of media relations, is what they call it. Mm-hmm. But and from there we moved to Kansas City and lived at the Lake of the Ozarks in Kansas, in Missouri, and so forth. Yes, I've got grandkids. She had 2 children, so those are my grandchildren. They each had 2 children, so that's 4 great-grandchildren. And then one of them had a child, so I've got 1 great-great-grandchild. Traveled all over. We made all 48 states, national states, with RVs. We had 4 different RVs over the lifetime, and we traveled extensively. Made all of the United States, almost all of Canada except for the very most easternmost, and even quite a bit of Mexico that we traveled in. But a lot of traveling with, and in the traveling, and that we moseyed to the west. Actually got to California and lived in California for a while. Then came to Arizona on about 1992, I think it was. We got we were looking for some place that for a couple living in a semi-retired state, and we looked around all at quite a number of places here. There is no question this is easily the one that stood out among us for us. We liked it better than any of them, and so in we had a home that we built here in '92, and we lived there until 2010 when we moved here. We sold that home and came here, came to Fellowship Square, and have never been sorry about that. That's been one of the best things that ever happened to us. Well, why they wanted to move here is one thing. Another, why what we found when we did get here is the reason that I'm so pleased with Fellowship Square, because they've provided so much in the way of expanding my life. That is expanding. I want to keep on learning and so forth. They've let me do that as much as I can. Recommend Fellowship Square. I am most impressed from John Scott Williams on down. The type of people that I have contacted here, or have contacted me, have just impressed me immensely. I am constantly amazed at the flow of people that we have here in terms of there's a large employee group, and I am constantly amazed at how dedicated and thoughtful they are as a group, as an individuals. I do strongly recommend it, and I do every day. Whenever I'm having any contact with people possibly coming here or thinking about a place like this, I always, I'm completely a positive. It was my recommendation for what they're going to find if they do come here. Hey, 7 years ago, our forefathers brought forth in this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That might as well do the Gettysburg Address.